יהיו לרצון אמרי פי והגיון ליבי לפניך אדוני צורי וגואלי לפניך. Birth is a beginning and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going and growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowledge, from foolishness to discretion and then to wisdom, from weakness to strength and strength to weakness, health to sickness, and back we pray to health renewed. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made a journey. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage from birth to death unto life everlasting. Amen. El Harachaman, dear God, you have taken a beloved person from us. We gather today and raise our voices in prayer and gratitude to the source of life, seeking comfort and strength and the power to move toward life renewed. We need fortitude and courage, composure and determination. And we can find each one of these qualities in the life of our dear and beloved Lenore Kessler. Yehiyu leratzon imrei fi v'hegyon libi lefanecha. I chose those words to chant today because they are words we share to ask that the place in our hearts from which our thoughts emerge might be accepted. Lefanecha, the rabbis must have meant to God, but in the context that I utter it today, I ask that the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable unto you, Lenore. You brought out the best in us, all of us. You who felt deeply and spoke with clarity about the privilege any of us ever has of standing at a microphone before a public assembly, however large or small, to speak from our hearts. We, the clergy of your synagogue, Lenore, Anshe Chesed, whose family ties take you as far back as your mother's confirmation, the year after the conclusion of the last major worldwide pandemic. We received your messages when you'd speak with us, and more often, when you'd write to us. Lenore, you are and have been a truth teller your whole life. You loved being alive. You loved being a mother and a grandmother, a matriarch. Lenore, you faced down an illness that would have worn others out long ago. You loved being generous and thoughtful to your community. I remember a meeting that Lenore and I had a few years ago when she established a fund to perpetuate the Jewish heritage through the leadership of the senior rabbi of our synagogue. Lenore was someone who believed very much in history and heritage. You who are gathered here and all who are watching today, you don't need me to remind you of that. But she believed history had something to teach us in the present moment. Indeed, as a side note, I was just sharing with Rabbi Caruso that when I was on medical leave a few months ago in my own fight against cancer, I read a message that Lenore penned for Cleveland.com about the tragic death of her uncle and aunt, her Aunt Lillian, for whom she is named. leaving her cousin an orphan, describing to readers the photos of their lives and the determination by which they lived. The message she shared was articulated in just such a subtle and humble way to let the readers know that even a person or a couple who died from a virus more than a century ago are remembered still by their niece and the stories she shared with her children. Anyway, at the meeting of which I mentioned a few years ago, Lenore spoke to me about how she and her family knew Rabbi Wolsey, the first American-born leader of our Anshe Chesed synagogue, who served the congregation from 1907 to 1925, and who grew the synagogue considerably and reformed its service, and was the leader who heralded the opening of our previous building, the legendary Euclid Avenue Temple. I told Lenore that he was my predecessor, Rabbi Wolsey, by something like 7 rabbis, and I thanked her for the gifts of substance and activism whose legacy in our community, because of you, Lenore, will still be felt by whomever is my successor 7 rabbis from now. Dear God, thank you, Lenore, for your values, what you stand for, and what you would never stand for. Several years ago, I remember a discussion in our chapel at Anshe Chesed where the community's leading public official, the county executive, was sharing a keynote address to remind members of our synagogue to participate in civic activism. I remember Lenore's hand rising and her voice clearing as she asked the executive about how he and the county might play a role in responding to the scorching violence that had touched our nation just days earlier after a gunman attacked children and educators in Newtown, Connecticut. When the county executive's answer to her question did not satisfy Lenore, she said, "You have to hear me. This is not just about that school. Hear what I am saying to you. I am a teacher." And then Lenore, her voice entirely composed, not quivering in the least, she added, "My daughter was killed by someone with a gun. You need to hear my voice telling you what that did to her, what it did to me." Now, although the executive did not himself have it in his power to direct prosecutions of existing crimes or a police force under his jurisdiction, you could see how moved he was and taken aback to see a woman like Lenore put together just so, standing poised in our chapel, wearing the clothing she thought respectful for an event in her chapel. This was an image indelibly left in his mind of what it looks like when a person models the Jewish value of raising our voice, speaking truth to power, railing against injustice. On a Sunday morning in a Cleveland December, a person resisting cancer in her mid-80s. I'll never, ever forget it. She was reminding our leaders and our community members to always stand up for the truth, and reminding us what the rabbis meant when they said that the destruction of a single life is the destruction of a world. She never would have marched up the steps of City Hall with that message. But here the county executive had come into her room, her chapel, her sanctuary. She was going to put herself up in her inimitable and beautiful way and demonstrate the convictions in her heart. For this service today, she also asked that one of our past presidents at Anshe Chesed, someone she selected on purpose, Mr. Brian Young, share some words. Though he is taking shelter today from the pandemic at his home, and that prevents him from being personally in this room, he sent the following story, which I will read verbatim, about his high regard for Lenore and the relationship they engendered over these recent years. He writes, "My name is Brian Young, and I've had the pleasure of knowing and being friends with Lenore for a short time, unfortunately only 12 years. It is an honor to be asked to reflect on our friendship. I met Lenore as the recipient of, I now understand, one of her famous handwritten notes. Lenore thought it was important to reprimand me. Remember, we had not yet met. For my choice, as I shared the bema as the president of Fairmount Temple, on a Friday night with our guest rabbi at the time, Rabbi Chuck Kroloff. I was not wearing a tie. And I, out of character, sat in one of the fancy bema chairs, leaving the rabbi with a simple folding chair. Thus, her note. The first paragraph was very complimentary about the service led by Rabbi Kroloff, and she was right. The second paragraph noted that she was certain that my mother, I did not know that Lenore knew my mother, going back to their high school days. But she wanted me to know that my mother would want me to know that I should have been wearing a tie, and I should have offered the rabbi a more comfortable chair. I was not being respectful, right again and again. And she wrote as I was wondering, who is this writing this note? The third paragraph, though, continued with her thanking me for my dedicated service to Fairmount Temple. So my emotions went from feeling good to feeling bad to feeling good again, and my realizing that Lenore was, in fact, very right and very smart. It was important to her and to me that she sent me her beautiful note, and what a beautiful friendship forged from that note. I responded with a note to thank her for her note, and then Lenore and I were always happy to see each other at Temple, and her with a wink, always commenting on how much she liked my tie. I did not know how beautiful the friendship was until Stephanie called and told me it was Lenore's wish that I speak today. Brian writes, Lenore, thank you for your note, which I still have, along with your friendship. With love, Brian Young. P.S. I always wear a tie at services now. I know Brian and Dee Dee are watching the webcast of this service. And on Lenore's behalf, Brian, on Zoom this Friday night or next, I'll be looking for your tie. You had better be wearing it. Amen.
Throughout the centuries, whenever our people felt lost, confused, grief-stricken, adrift, they would say words from the Psalm 121, I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? I believe that Lenore said these words often, if not exactly quoting them. She knew that her help comes from Adonai, creator, maker of heaven and of earth.
Shamayim
My dear Stephanie, Jonathan, dear family, Josh, Jared, Jeff, dear friends, those who are joining us technologically. When Lenore was 19 years old, her father, Dr. Martin Golden, took her with him on a trip to Los Angeles. He was going to visit his brother, who was an attorney to several of the stars in Hollywood. Among the most memorable experiences Lenore had on that entirely memorable visit was the opportunity to meet Susan Hayward. In fact, for the rest of her life, Lenore treasured a photograph of that meeting in which she appears with her father, her uncle, and the actress Susan Hayward. Lenore loved that trip and was tempted to remain to pursue a career in the movies. It is not hard to imagine her as an actress in Hollywood. She was beautiful. She was glamorous. She had charm, elegance, and charisma. Furthermore, she would have set about attaining her goal, as she did every endeavor throughout her life, with the guiding principles by which she lived. She would have educated herself in everything she needed to know. She would have worked very hard at her craft, and given her determination, her strong will, her belief that one has to rise to the occasion, it is hard to imagine her not succeeding at anything to which she set her mind. Lenore's father did not think that becoming an actress in Hollywood was proper for a Jewish woman, and that put an end to the idea, but not to the poetic sensibilities of his daughter, who was as much the romantic dreamer as she was the practical realist. As son-in-law, really son, Jonathan articulated, hers was a life fully lived, dreamer and realist in one package. And we might add, with an abiding love of TCM movies. Her own epic movie began in Cleveland Heights on February 9th, 1927, the firstborn of Dr. Martin and Idelle Golden's two daughters, as Janice soon followed. Lenore had only the fondest memories of growing up on Tullamore, of grade school, of Heights High, and the Euclid Avenue Temple. She was inordinately proud of her Anshe Chesed history and roots, of her grandfather, Samuel Goldberg, who donated the lumber with which the temple was built, of her mother, Idelle Goldberg, who was confirmed in 1919 by Rabbi Wolsey, and her own consecration by Rabbi Brickner in 1932, and confirmation in 1942. Some of the most enduring friendships of her life began in kindergarten, in both her secular school and at Temple. Lenore cherished her friends as one of the foundations of her life, as she maintained lifelong friendships, such as the one she enjoyed with Jackie Cronenberg, from the time they were 6-year-old consecrants at the Euclid Avenue Temple, to her friendship with Ruby Bass, who came into her life when Jonathan came into Stephanie's. Within this last year, pre-COVID, during a rare visit with her at her home, I remember her telling me how all 3 of her children, Brenda, Stephanie, and Michael, were confirmed at Fairmont Temple, and how Stephanie and Jonathan were married by Rabbi Lelyveld there. Lenore was remarkably rooted in this community, its people, its organizations and institutions, its community, and its history. If we flash back for a moment in her movie's narrative, we find the compelling immigrant story of her father, Martin, who arrived from Eastern Europe at Ellis Island with his siblings, according to the ship's manifest. He was 11 years old. It is a testament to his determination, courage, work ethic, and natural gifts of intellect and talent that the immigrant Meir became Dr. Martin Golden, the first Jewish oral surgeon in Cleveland. He was beloved and respected in his field, a community leader, mentor, and philanthropist. His model and example, as well as those of her mother, exerted a powerful influence on Lenore, as she embodied their love of family, devotion to community, and righteous acts on behalf of the most vulnerable among us. She also inherited a healthy dose of strong-mindedness, determination, goal-oriented energy, and the will to succeed. She was a real bookworm who loved school, was an excellent student, was especially interested in history, believed fervently in the power of education, and was a voracious reader her whole life, which tended to fuel her visionary, idealistic, passionate inclinations while developing her skills as a thinker, observer, and exceedingly erudite individual. True to her nature as both a realist and dreamer, she loved music, especially jazz, vocal music, Frank Sinatra, musicals. Her mother played the violin with a division of the Cleveland Orchestra, which fostered in Lenore an additional appreciation of musical expression. She was fortunate in the comfort and sophistication of her earliest years and experience. Even during the Depression, her family thrived, and she went off to Lake Erie College and then came back to Western Reserve University, firmly grounded in and supported by family, friends, and faith. I can imagine that if she had pursued a different path in life, she might have been a Grace Kelly type of presence on the screen, with a bit of Julie Andrews because of Lenore's beautiful voice. With that dream relegated to Lenore's enjoyment of biographies and autobiographies of the personalities she admired, she brought her own style and glamour to the pursuit of other goals. Her instincts were always toward education, an objective she fully realized when she went back to school at the age of 40. She enrolled at Georgia State University and earned her master's degree in education, attending at night and during the summers while already working full-time. She was justly proud of that accomplishment and the stellar career she enjoyed, as she taught practically everything in every grade, in lower school and upper school, especially in special education. She taught English as a second language, and even in a lockdown psychiatric facility. She worked full-time, and she worked very hard. When her second husband, Dr. Frank Waits, a renowned pediatrician in Atlanta, would make house calls at night, she would go with him to keep him company. While he examined his young patients, Lenore would sit in the car with a flashlight, grading papers. Her teaching never really stopped. It was a natural extension of her very essence. And with every breath she took, she taught us all, with her inner beauty, her grace, her refined and yet resolute touch, the way to live in this world, with purpose and intention, with compassion and unending kindness, with organization, meticulous attention to detail, with profound thoughtfulness and caring, with goodness and compassion, with a zest for life, an indomitable will, a vision of the future that is better, nobler, kinder, and gentler because we attended to it with our minds and hearts fully engaged, ready to do the work, ready to reach out with care, concern, support, creativity, and resourcefulness. Her teaching was an expression of her entire self, her practical side and her romantic sensibilities. There was always the subject at hand, the information, abilities, skills that needed to be learned and mastered. But Lenore never neglected her students' souls and spirits. She could see their potential, could envision a better future for them. Teaching itself was an investment in potential, possibility, the as yet unknown and unforeseen. As you have heard and will continue to hear, we were all students of her wisdom and her example. Among the many notes and letters from her that I cherish, how well we all know her distinctive, elegant penmanship that invariably signaled a message of praise, gratitude, observation, appreciation, or on occasion, criticism. There is one that I would share as a prime example of her deeply felt convictions and her desire to elucidate why a course of action might not be the wisest. It was in reference to a change in policy on the part of the clergy of Fairmont Temple to accept the possibility under certain circumstances of marrying an interfaith couple. She wrote, "Please permit me to respond to you about the new interfaith proposal. I know you will understand my feelings, and that is why I am writing. Marriage without serious conversion of the non-Jewish partner is not a marriage committed to Jewish values and traditions. A serious conversion is months of study about the religion itself, its history, its codes, especially its responsibilities. Marriage is difficult at times, and raising children sometimes more difficult. A home with two religions, in-laws with different religions, is easily destructive to a marriage. A serious conversion is a contract with the Jewish spouse-to-be, that their life together and family will be a Jewish home. It is also a contract between the non-Jewish spouse and God. It is not to be taken lightly. It has little to do with diversity and inclusiveness. Yes, I am a dinosaur, 89 years old, born in the Coolidge administration and raised in a different world. But millions have died for our exquisite faith. We must protect and preserve our Jewish religion for future generations." She added a postscript. "You may share this with our other clergy if you think it appropriate." As we have come to understand, long after the subject matter has faded from memory, the lesson of the teacher herself remains. And that lesson fills us with delight and with gratitude. As Stephanie related, Lenore lived by certain principles: education, work hard, marry well, live beneath your means. She did all of these things, and we might have added, lived with exuberance, enthusiasm, and class. There were unexpected twists and turns in her life's drama, but Lenore herself would say that she married 3 wonderful men, each of whom enriched her life in untold ways. George Chattel was also a confirmand of Anshe Chesed congregation in 1939 by Rabbi Brickner, who also married them. Together they welcomed the 3 greatest blessings of their lives, their children Brenda, Stephanie, and Michael. While the marriage did not last, they were ultimately able to maintain a cordiality and communication because they both loved their children and cared about their welfare. On a visit to Atlanta to visit a great aunt, Lenore was fixed up with Frank Waits and ended up staying in Atlanta. His southern accent was so thick that Stephanie could not understand him, but Lenore did, and she was happy with him. Unfortunately, he passed away from cancer much too soon, leaving her a young widow. She married again in large measure because of her enduring faith. As she remained in Atlanta, she attended Rosh Hashanah services at her congregation there. She arrived a bit late to the crowded sanctuary. As she searched for a place to sit, Ed Kessler spotted her, as he had previously on more than one occasion. He rose, made everyone in his pew move down, and made room for her to sit next to him. He was a big, good-looking man who clearly took charge of situations. He called her for a date that Saturday night, and as Stephanie described, Lenore managed to buy an appropriate new dress, new shoes, and have her hair done in record time to go out with him, and that is no small feat. Nevertheless, when, unsurprisingly, Ed asked her to marry him, she said no. She had already been married twice, and she wasn't going to do it again. Undeterred, Ed went to the rabbi with his difficulty. "She won't marry me." Rabbi Sugarman called up Lenore and asked her to come in. "My goodness, Lenore, what in the world is the matter? Ed is a wonderful man. He makes a comfortable living with the Kessler department stores. He works hard. He has a great family, and he wants to marry you. The rabbi prevailed. They married, and Lenore stayed in Atlanta. As she reflected on her marital history at grandson Jared's rehearsal dinner, in a moment of colorful candor that is preserved on video for the family archives, with each husband, the diamonds got bigger, the honeymoons longer, and the kisses, ooh la la. With Ed, she traveled the state of Georgia, and they traveled the world while finding a world in each other. Lenore's story would not have been epic without the tests of strength and character that challenged even her remarkable composure, her romantic spirit, and her enduring faith. Lenore sustained the loss of her beloved sister Janice when Janice was just 52, of the genetic von Hippel-Lindau disease, and then of her nephew, Janice's son Bruce, to the same syndrome. Lenore and Janice enjoyed a very close, loving, and mutually supportive relationship. Janice was a wonderful aunt, a wonderful person, and her husband, Dr. Seymour Reifman, was mentored by and then went into practice with Janice and Lenore's father. Lenore stayed close to her niece Anne and her husband Peter Lynn and their family, and with her nephew Joel, who sends his love across the miles from India. Lenore lost 3 husbands in the course of her lifetime, and each time with her practical, down-to-earth, realistic attitude, she picked herself up, reset her goals, assessed her circumstances, and moved forward with her characteristic courage, determination, and belief in a new day ahead. She lost a great-granddaughter, Natalie. The loss of her daughter, Brenda, however, in 1985, in Atlanta, was a loss from which she never fully recovered, and it forever changed her life, and that of Brenda's son, Josh, who was just 6 years old at the time. It changed them all, the entire family. Lenore carried on. She found joy again. She devoted herself to good works and meaningful endeavors in Brenda's memory, and she cared for grandson Josh in ways that sustained them both, but the ache never went away. Brenda was a beautiful, engaging woman who adored her son and remains in this family's hearts forever. Lenore's every instinct reached out to Josh, and he acknowledges that his nanny raised him. He is here today, having traveled from Beaufort, Georgia, where he is the proud owner and proprietor of Spartan Roofing Solutions. He traveled here today in tribute to the beautiful, I'm quoting you, beautiful, classy, kind-hearted, energetic, refined model and example of the picture-perfect woman who cared passionately for her family and was his nanny. She provided for him. She watched out for him. She cared for his health, his education, his religious upbringing, his welfare in every way, and fed him all the Stouffer's frozen dinners he could possibly digest, as, all will confirm, Lenore did not cook. She enjoyed going out, however, and in a live-beneath-your-means kind of way, liked nothing better than a drive-in for a hamburger and fries with Stephanie. She would also ask Stephanie to go by Dairy Queen or East Coast Custard after a medical appointment, as she said, we have to sweeten the day a little bit. It was something she did for others all the time, sweeten their days. Through her social activism, her support of just causes, and her philanthropic work. In addition to her annual support of the Martin Luther King Jr. service and weekend at Fairmont Temple, she established the Lenore Kessler Lifelong Learning Fund. She also established the Lenore Kessler Endowment for Highbrook Camp at the Cleveland Site Center, and has supported St. Jude's Hospital for Children, the Salvation Army, Doctors Without Borders, the World Health Organization, Compassionate Friends, and the Cleveland Jewish Community Federation. She would annually send cookies and candy at Christmas time to the Orange City Police and Fire Department, the Plain Dealer Carrier, and the postman. She was an endless source of compassionate notes and messages to those who had suffered a loss. And all of this only scratches the surface of her generosity. I believe, in fact, that one of the motivations for living beneath one's means was in order to have the wherewithal to give wisely, generously, and impactfully to those in real need. With all of her interests, her activities, her career, her friends, it was her family that was at the center of her life and was the subject of the over 50 scrapbooks she meticulously organized and maintained as the family historian and repository of memories, a position Stephanie has already begun to assume. Lenore adored her family, her parents, her sister Janice and her family and her children, Brenda and now Josh, with Catherine Miller and Josh's children, Shaylee and Dylan, Stephanie and Jonathan, and their children and grandchildren, Dr. Jeffrey and Rosera, with 19-month-old Ezra and siblings soon to arrive, and Dr. Jared and Rachel, and Michael, who has forwarded these thoughts about his mother. Thank you for reaching out to me regarding my mom, Lenore Kessler. My mom had many outstanding qualities: business acumen, generosity, deliberation, and others. However, I feel her commitment and dedication to the Jewish community and her love and pride of being a Jewish person stands alone. My mom very much identified as being Jewish. Growing up, she taught Sunday school, lit candles Friday evening, and made a festive Shabbat meal. She taught me how to make challah, the importance of giving tzedakah, and made sure I had a proper Jewish education. She very much saw herself as part of the Jewish community and people. At the same time, she was worldly, sophisticated, and perfectly comfortable in a non-Jewish world. She had non-Jewish friends, and their personal religious beliefs were not an issue. You wouldn't even call it tolerant. She was just not judgmental. Thank you for the kind words you will say about my mom, which she certainly deserves. Michael Chattel. Among the kind words that have been shared about her, Jeff and Jared saw in their grandmother a woman of infinite kindness for whom everything revolved around her family. Jeff will speak in just a few moments, but for both of them and all of them, Lenore in many ways represented their family and was a stellar role model for them all. She was a very present, involved mother who took her daughters to Detroit to see the famous Vienna Lipizzaner horses. She encouraged her children's interests, supported their activities, befriended their friends, rejoiced in their successes, and comforted their disappointments. She traveled to Israel when Michael lived there. She rejoiced in the weddings of her children and grandchildren. We all remember how important it was to her to be present at Jared's wedding and the Herculean effort Stephanie mounted to get her there. But then it has fallen to Stephanie, with Jonathan at her side, to be the guardian angel of this family. When Lenore lived in Atlanta, it was Stephanie who looked after her grandfather, Dr. Martin Golden. And when Lenore moved back to Cleveland 15 years ago, it was in large measure because Stephanie was here. The added benefits were Lenore's lifelong friends, Stephanie's family, and her fast friendship with Ruby Bass, Jonathan's mother. Jonathan and Stephanie made it possible through an organization's auction for Lenore and Ruby to go with them to Potomac, Maryland, to visit with Sergeant and Eunice Kennedy Shriver in their home. Historian and romantic as she was, Lenore was in her element, both she and Ruby as the elegant, sophisticated, cultured, and refined women that they were the absolute equals of their hosts and visited comfortably with them. The picture of that afternoon is the worthy successor to the Hollywood photo taken almost 70 years before. She had hoped to live to her 95th birthday, and Stephanie did everything in her power to make that happen, as did Lenore's new friends, her outstanding caregivers, and her doctor in the family, Jonathan. Lenore never failed to tell me that Stephanie, quote, is such a wonderful daughter. She couldn't believe how extraordinary you were, as you visited every day, supervised every detail of her care, ensured that she remained comfortable in her home, isolated from all COVID concerns, and arranged for 2 memorable weekends just last month, when first Josh came to visit with Katie, Shaylee, and Dylan, and then Jeffrey and Rosera with Ezra and Jared and Rachel the following weekend. Lenore rallied both times, and the weekends were filled with conversation, laughter, memories, and love. About 6 years ago, in answer to a spiritual yearning Lenore was feeling, she and I arranged to meet in the chapel at Temple one afternoon. We sat and talked and prayed and laughed and shared personal stories, anguish, and joys. As we concluded our time together, we went up to the bima, and in front of the open ark, I blessed Lenore. In response to the impact she felt from our time together, I received the most glorious thank you note, to which she put a P.S., which reads, "At my memorial, please mention how much I have enjoyed being Jewish." She also gave me 2 gifts, which are among my most cherished possessions. In this wrapping is a compact, a powder compact, that belonged to her mother, Idel, and, quote, is in remarkable condition for its age. I have been very careful with it, and all the beads are intact. It sounds like maybe several of you have a compact just like this one. I was going to offer to show it to you. She also gave me her confirmation prayer book, with her name inscribed in gold on the cover, and with copies of her parents' tickets for that morning's service and the confirmation program of Friday morning, May the 22nd, 1942, at 9:30 o'clock. There is a passage in her prayer book that reads, in part, "Grant, O Lord, that when the time of our departure comes, we may look back without sorrow upon the life we leave, and with trust in thy mercy enter that life which thou hast prepared for the righteous." Zecher Tzadeket Livracha. May the memory of our Lenore Golden Kessler, our righteous realist and dreamer, be forever a blessing. And let us say, Amen. I call now on Jeffrey, her grandson, to share his words of memory and of reflection. Dr. Jeffrey Bass.
Thank you, Rabbi and Cantor. There's a smile under here, Mom. That goes for you too, Jared. Thank you for allowing us a few moments today to remember the life of my grandmother, who we called Nanny. I'm her grandson, Jeffrey, oldest son of Stephanie, and I'm speaking on behalf of my brother, Jared. You have heard of the prominence of it. You've heard of the prominence of education and family today, which were core to her life. Jared and I have felt these values and been shaped by them. It's very good. I'd like to get through it. Jared and I have felt these values and been shaped by them throughout our lives. In fact, we have carefully, repeatedly reviewed this reflection for Nanny Lenore, as a former proofreader would expect nothing other than impeccable syntax and perfect spelling. Education and family were of course not discrete pieces, but rather interwoven in her life and our memories of Nanny. At a table in Nanny's house, we would be students to her retelling the living history of our family. We would sit with her, looking at a favorite scrapbook, stop before a memorable photo on the wall, or ask her again to tell us about her mother's violin, so lovingly preserved outside her bedroom. As Jared and I grew older, we loved those lessons about our family and her legacy. We knew that Nanny had found the manifest documenting her father, Martin Golden's arrival at Ellis Island and the United States, and knew of many other investigations she had conducted to build the family history. But as intrepid as we knew she was, I think Jared and I were equally surprised when we learned that Nanny was taking a trip to Russia in the 1990s to retrace the footprints of our ancestors. How brave and adventurous, we thought. Perhaps this is what motivated Jared and I to both explore and learn about the photographs of our grandfather. George Chantel, taken during World War II while he was in service as a medic. We could see how proud Nanny was of our work, and Jared and I were glowing in her compliments. She had photos which Jared printed professionally hung in her home, filling an entire wall. A poster I composed displayed in her office, and both Jared and I have framed accompanying pieces. All three of us so cherished this shared exploration. The foremost memory for Jared and I, though, is not a singular moment, but a continuum of visits with us for Grandparents' Day during grade school. As we were thinking about what we wanted to say today, both Jared and I shared that we both hold close photos of us with Nanny Lenore and Grandma Ruby on Grandparents' Day, These photos remind us of the warmth and love we felt from Nanny when she, seated in a child's chair much too short for her, next to us, shared how proud she was of us. L'Adore Vador, from Nanny's grandparents and parents, through her to our mother, and from our mother to us, we have learned life's most important values of education, family, conviction, resilience, generosity, among others. The strongest legacy that Nanny leaves, though, is through our mother. How many times, Mom, do you think we've heard about what a wonderful cook you are? Or how magnificently you maneuver that van? We know how proud she was of you. In fact, she told us every time we saw her. Truly, in the last 15 years in particular, Jared and I have been witness to the extraordinary devotion of our mother to Nanny, and the way that you ensured that she enjoyed her long, full life in her home, surrounded by familiar and warm memories of her family past, present, and future. Of course, it must be no coincidence that we're gathered today on Thanksgiving weekend, a holiday she looked forward to every year. Perhaps this was a way for all of us to be together with family and friends. How thankful we are this Thanksgiving for all the time we spent with her and for all of us who are joined together today. We are sad, of course, but we know that our time is finite in this world. For Nanny Lenore, it was time well spent and a life fully lived.
Thank you, Jeffrey. You spoke beautifully and so heartfelt, and I know Jared is glad you spoke on his behalf as. It's not often that you find three of our clergy together at the same funeral. I just want to mention that, not for anything that should be praiseworthy of us, but rather what Lenore Kessler meant to all of us. That's why we're here today. You've heard a lot from her loving clergy. I'm just going to share just a couple of memories. Every year, as Cantor Sager mentioned, Lenore sponsored this MLK Shabbat program that has now become basically the social justice high holy days at our temple. We've commonly found 500 people filling our pews to hear from an erudite speaker, oftentimes from the social justice world, oftentimes someone of African American descent. A program she supported and loved. Each year before, when we were choosing our speaker, I would call her and tell her about the prospects, and she was always so enthusiastic. "Oh, Rabbi, I'm so excited. I'm so excited, Rabbi." I could hear her say it. I treasured the phone calls afterwards when we would debrief about it. Lenore was passionate about our temple, building relationships with our African American brothers and sisters. To Lenore, she understood that one could not be Jewish in a vacuum, but we needed to engage in an exchange of ideas and common values to make this world a better and more peaceful place. She was fiercely particularistic as a Jew, but just as much she was fiercely universalist in terms of our connection and interlocking puzzle that we are with humanity. Cantor Sager shared some of the same, from the same event when we talked about intermarriage, right? And Cantor, she also, she approached me and talked about how respectful she was of our views and the challenge of a 21st century life in terms of intermarriage. And but she made it known. She wanted her clergy to know how she felt about Jewish continuity, and that was really important to her. She felt like she was a part of that bigger puzzle. And a number of years ago, when Lenore could still be out and about, she took me out to lunch. We went to Taza at Eton. And dining with Lenore felt like I had been transported to another time. Unlike my typical routine, which involved wolfing down food as I worked, we had the most civilized and genteel time together. We talked about our lives, my forthcoming sabbatical trip around the country with my family, which resulted in her gifting each one of my 3 children a journal to take notes in order to record their adventures, and they used them. She talked about her past loves, the memory of Brenda, of course, and during that sabbatical trip, we made a stop to the temple in Atlanta and viewed the special tribute plaque for her daughter, and I said a special prayer, and I told Lenore about that afterwards. At the conclusion of this meal, she gifted me a framed picture of her consecration class. Now, she teamed up with my assistant, Kathy, to find the right frame, the right wrapping paper, and she presented this to me as a source of pride for her temple devotion, and of course her bona fides as a pedigreed Reformed Jew, consecrated by none other than Rabbi Barnett Brickner himself. She wrote, "Dear Rabbi Caruso, Kathy, my assistant, and I had a wonderful time picking out this framing for you. Kathy is so artistic, and it is because of her that the picture looks so nice," of course not taking credit. "Thank you for requesting," because I had expressed interest in this picture, this 1932 consecration picture of a very young Rabbi Brickner, our 82nd Street Temple, and most of all, little 5-year-olds beginning the journey of their spiritual life. My sincere regards and admiration. I have this hanging right next to my desk. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we all have our special Lenore keepsakes. She truly was the model of a congregational member we all strive for. Someone who loves her faith fiercely, challenges her clergy in the most incredible, respectful ways, and sets an example herself for her clergy of what it means to be the kind of Jew our sages believed we should be. She set that example for each one of us. We are grateful to her. She always asked about our families, our lives. My wife is watching today. I know she would liked us all of our spouses to be here today, but she always asked about our greater well-being beyond our professional status. We are grateful for having her in our lives, and may her memory forever be a blessing. Amen. I now invite you, as you are able to rise at your seats, for the chanting of our memorial prayer, El Maleh Rachamim.
Ametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina im gidoshim utehorim Shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Lenore Kessler, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.